Today I'm taking you through my top 25 actors of the 21st century based on how many of my favorite movies they were in. I'm starting off with Rosamund Pike at number 25. She's one of my personal favorites, but unfortunately hasn't been in that many huge movies. I absolutely love her in Gone Girl, which is one of my top 100 movies, and we're actually doing that on the podcast later this year, so make sure to subscribe for that. I also really enjoy her in I Care a Lot, and most recently in Saltburn. At number 24, we have Chris Hemsworth. So I'm putting him on this list because of him being Thor across all the Avengers, but more importantly because of the movie Rush. As a big Formula One fan, I love that movie. It's one of my favorite sports movies and one of my top 100 films. Also, I'm comfortable enough to say as a straight man, Chris Hemsworth's hot, and I enjoy seeing him on screen being a hot, confident guy. At number 23, we have Andy Samberg. Now, this is a film ranking, but I'm not going to lie to you, Brooklyn Nine-Nine is one of my favorite shows. However, Andy Samberg has also been in two of my top 100 movies of all time, Palm Springs and Popstar. At number 22, we have Jessica Chastain. The two movies of hers that made my top 100 are Molly's Game and The Martian, and she's also in Interstellar, which I love as well. At number 21, we have Emily Blunt for her roles in The Devil Wears Prada and Edge of Tomorrow, both among my top 100 movies. I'm also a big fan of Looper and Oppenheimer, in which Emily Blunt is as well. Quick word on my methodology. I have a running list of my top 100 movies of all time. So I've basically taken all of those movies that came out in the 21st century and looked at the actors that are in the most of them. That's how I created my initial shortlist, and then I made some subjective decisions, moving some people up and down based on my personal taste, as well as if maybe some of their roles were smaller and some of them were bigger. So that's how I've come up with this list, and that's why for every one of these I'm going to tell you which one of their movies are in my top 100, plus the ones that I really liked, but just didn't quite make my top 100. So this is a purely subjective list, and so there's going to be some big omissions, and I'm going to try to give some shout outs and honorable mentions along the way. At number 20, I have Rose Byrne. So even though I really enjoyed her in Bridesmaids, that's not one of my top 100 movies. However, Spy is, for an equally hilarious role, and one of my guilty pleasures, I love Troy, and you might have forgotten it, but she's actually in there as well. Another movie that I really love of hers is Neighbors, with Seth Rogen, who will be on this list later. At number 19, we had Ethan Hawke. This one actually surprised me a lot. As I said, I drew up all of my favorite movies from the 21st century and see who had been in the most of them, and it turned out Ethan Hawke had been in 3. He's in Training Day. Denzel will obviously be on this list. He's also in Lord of War in a supporting role, and I absolutely love that movie starring Nicolas Cage. Unfortunately, Nicolas Cage didn't make this list because most of his big hits were before the 21st century. Ethan Hawke was in Predestination, which is one of my more niche top 100 movies that is just super weird and quirky and we'll definitely be doing on the podcast one of these days. And Ethan Hawke is obviously in the Sunrise trilogy, which is close to my heart but doesn't quite make my top 100 film list. At number 18, we have Ben Affleck, mostly for his role in Gone Girl, but also in Air, both of which are in my top 100. He's also in a bunch of other movies that I love, including The Accountant, Argo, and The Last Duel. Totally forgotten, but that was my favorite movie of 2021. At number 17, we have Scarlett Johansson for her roles in The Prestige and the MCU. I'm also a big fan of her in Jojo Rabbit, Lucy, Don John, directed by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, who unfortunately didn't make this list. And another one of my guilty pleasures, The Island. At number 16, we have Tom Cruise. Now, the reason he isn't higher is because a lot of his famous movies came out in the 20th century. However, my top 100 movies of his in the 21st century include The Edge of Tomorrow and Tropic Thunder, one of my favorite roles of all time, him playing Les Grossman in that film. Other Tom Cruise films I love include American Made, Minority Report, Top Gun Maverick, and Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, to represent the Mission Impossible franchise. While this video is a bit of fun, the main purpose of this channel is to put out Dom's Film Club, which is my monthly podcast in which I sit down with a guest to talk about one of our favorite movies. We have already 13 episodes out with movies like Elf, Bridesmaids, The Mask of Zorro, and a bunch of other movies that I'm going to be talking about in this video. In 2026, we have some real bangers coming, like The Matrix, Gone Girl, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, The Prestige, and so much more. So make sure to subscribe here on YouTube, as well as follow us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. At number 15, we have Seth Rogen for his role in Superbad, and he's technically in Anchorman. Both of those movies are in my top 100. But the main reason I've got him this high is because he's in a bunch of other movies that I love, like The Long Shot, Neighbors, Bad Money, The 40-Year-Old Virgin, and most recently, Good Fortune. At number 14, we have Will Ferrell, thanks to his roles in Anchorman, Step Brothers, and Wedding Crashers. And then he's in so many other amazing comedies that I love, like Talladega Nights, Elf, The Lego Movie, Barbie, Old School, and Zoolander. At number 13, we have Michael Caine. 21st century movies of his that made my top 100 include Inception, The Dark Knight trilogy, and The Prestige. I also really love Tenet and Interstellar. And yes, you guessed it, I'm a big Christopher Nolan fan. At number 12, we have Rachel McAdams. Movies of hers that made my top 100 are Mean Girls, The Notebook, and Wedding Crashers. I'm also a big fan of her in Game Night with Jason Bateman, who unfortunately didn't make this list, but who I'm a big fan of as well. At number 11, another Wedding Crashers alumni, Bradley Cooper. The other two movies of his that made my top 100 are Limitless and The Hangover. As we get into the top 10, I have to warn you, there are going to be a lot of people that you're expecting who aren't going to be there. I've told you about my methodology, but I just want to make some shout outs to some honorable mentions who unfortunately are not in this top 10. They include the likes of Viola Davis, Daniel Day-Lewis, George Clooney, Jake Gyllenhaal, Keanu Reeves, Tom Hanks, and even Vin Diesel. What can I say? I'm a big fan of Fast and Furious and Triple X. At number 10, we have Jon Bernthal. He's one of those that's not as obvious as some of the others, but is a personal favorite of mine. And I was really glad to see that my data-driven approach got him this high. Jon Bernthal's been in Ford vs. Ferrari, The Wolf of Wall Street, and Fury, and I also love him in The Accountant. At number 9, we have Samuel L. Jackson, who's in Coach Carter, which is my all-time favorite sports movie. He's also this high because of his role as Nick Fury in The Avengers and because he's in Triple X. He's also technically in Inglourious Basterds as the narrator, and I love him in Kill Bill, another small role, and the 2004 action movie SWAT, which, if you look into it, has an amazing cast. Number 8, we have Bill Hader, who's another less obvious one. He's been in 4 of my favorite movies: Trainwreck, Popstar, Superbad, and Tropic Thunder. At number 7, we have Jonah Hill for his roles in Superbad, The Wolf of Wall Street, Moneyball, and 22 Jump Street, the last of which is my favorite comedy of all time. I'm also a big fan of War Dogs with him and Miles Teller, another honorable mention. Absolutely love Whiplash. Number 6, we have one of those that surprised me a little bit. But when I started looking through the data, I had to put Matt Damon this high because he's in 5 of my favorite movies of all time: The Departed, Ocean's 11, Ford vs. Ferrari, The Martian, and Air. He's also in Interstellar and Oppenheimer, both of which I love. At number 5, we have my highest ranked female actor, Margot Robbie, thanks to her roles in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and The Wolf of Wall Street, as well as technically being in The Big Short. It's a small, but I think we can argue, memorable role. I'm also a big fan of her movies Barbie, Focus, and Bombshell. At number 4, we have Christian Bale. The Dark Knight trilogy, Ford vs. Ferrari, The Prestige, The Big Short. Need I say any more? At number 3, we have Denzel Washington, who would probably be at number 2 if I was doing an all-time list, but we're only focusing on 21st century movies. Training Day, Man on Fire, American Gangster, and Flight are all among my top 100 movies, and I also love Inside Man and Equalizer movies. I'll also point out that I was lucky enough to see Denzel do Othello on Broadway, which was the best theatrical experience of my life and just adds to my appreciation of him as an amazing actor. And number 2 is Leonardo DiCaprio. The Wolf of Wall Street, The Departed, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Catch Me If You Can, and Inception are all among my top 100 favorite movies of all time. And I'm also a big fan of Django Unchained. And at number 1, this is the person who, for the last few years, I decided was my favorite actor, and I was really happy to see that my data-driven methodology gave me the correct result. So with 6 movies out of my top 100 more than any other actor, Brad Pitt is my favorite actor of the 21st century, and honestly, my all-time favorite actor. Those movies are Inglourious Basterds, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Moneyball, The Big Short, Ocean's 11, and Troy. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe for more content about movies, and tell me in the comments which of my actors you agree with or disagree with, and for any that you think I missed, make your case. What are their 2 to 5 movies from the 21st century that mean that they would be on this list for you?